Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Good? I think we're ready to get started. All right. So everybody's here for PC Power Management, right? My name is Seth Kahn. I'm a professional services consultant with Verdium. For the past 3 years, I've been focusing on helping customers implement our power management solution. And that's pretty much all I live and breathe right now is power management. So I thought I'd come out to MMS and give a speech and talk about how you can configure System Center Configuration Manager Power Management in enterprises and be able to answer any questions anybody has to give you guys a good, solid foundation on power management. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about why you should implement power management, give an overview of Configuration Manager Power Management. We're going to talk about the implementation process of how you actually will implement power management in your environment, go through the details of the actual Configuration Manager components for power management, and then talk about some professional tips and lessons learned from the field. And if we have time afterwards, we'll do some questions and answers. So why do it? I think it's a fairly obvious question. IT, if you look at this chart right here, this slide, it just basically is to show how IT is a large consumer of energy consumption worldwide. And out of all of IT energy consumption, your endpoint devices, your PCs, your laptops, and your monitors consume the most amount of electricity. Many organizations, I'm sure many of you guys have green or sustainability efforts going on in your organizations, and power management of your computers is a great way to get involved to be part of that overall effort for sustainability reasons. Culturally, IT has basically, we own the night, right? We don't want to ever impact our end users during the daytime. We want to make sure we do our software delivery, our patching, our maintenance when it's not obstructive to your end users, right? And this is a cultural change when you start talking about putting machines to sleep and turning them off when they're not in use at night. So really with the tools that are available nowadays and the maturity in hardware and software like Config Manager 2012, there's no reason that you can't do at least some sort of basic power management and do part of your corporate green IT goals and lowering energy consumption. So Config Manager Power Management, it was originally introduced in Configuration Manager 2007 R3. I think there was a management pack before that gave you some basic reporting elements, but it was a feature of 2007 R3. What it actually is composed of is a power policy agent. So actually configuring power policy enforcement, telling computers to go to sleep when they're not in use. That's the power policy agent of enforcing power policies. The second component of it is an automatic wake service. So automatic wake for advertisements or software deployments prior to their start times. Same thing with software updates. Required start time, making sure that systems are powered on before their mandatory required times. And then there's a reporting component to kind of show how successful or unsuccessful you are with power management with Config Manager, both 2007 and 2012. So most of the content I'll be talking about today is relevant for both 2007 R3 and 2012. The only differences between power management with 2007 and 2012 is they've introduced a user opt-out option, which is very useful, especially if you culturally are having difficulties getting a power management enforcement going on in your environment. And in 2012 SP1, brand new, and I believe they talked about this in the treasure hunt session yesterday, they added a proxy-based wake on LAN. And we'll talk about that a little later on, what that actually is and how that will help you solve some of your power management struggles in your environments. So the implementation process, I want to take a few minutes to really talk about this because the main component and main takeaway is not to just turn it on. I mean, it's very simple to turn on power management in Config Manager. It's about 3 different checkboxes that you can go, and then all of a sudden you can just start enforcing power policies in your environment. Before you turn it on, you really need to understand your business requirements. For example, a college might have different use cases and different power policies needed for labs, following a schedule of the lab schedule. They might have a different schedule for your admin workers, or your back office workers have more of a 9-to-5 traditional schedule. You need to find out if there's reasons why you shouldn't enforce power policy on certain businesses So really, reach out to your business, understand the requirements, understand what you're trying to accomplish, and come up with an appropriate strategy based on what you look at. The other thing to talk about is a baseline. So what we talk about baseline in this industry is prior to turning on power management, you want to have a period of time that you actually measure power consumption on your devices through the different reporting tools that are available. So you have something to compare against from before and after. So you know if you're successful or not. You have a way of understanding if your power policies are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, and give you some rudimentary ideas of how much energy you're actually saving in the environment. And that's really in the config manager reporting aspect of power management, which we'll talk about later on. A really important tip that I've learned from implementing this for the past 3 years is you really need to test before you turn it on worldwide or enterprise-wide. It seems like a very simple and trivial concept, but I can't tell you how many times organizations get burned by not actually testing power policies on their hardware to ensure they're not causing any sort of issue to their end users. The real goal is to test before you turn it on so you can actually fix any problem that may come up in the environments before you impact your end users, obviously. And definitely document whatever you test. Come up with a spreadsheet, put it on a SharePoint site, just store it somewhere so you have reference for your change controls, or if there's any questions about maybe a one-off that's not exactly functioning the way it's supposed to, you can show that you've actually tested it, and for the most part, you know it's working. But again, you might have a one-off situation, a specific software application, or a unique driver that conflicts with power management. You want to have some sort of documentation around what you've done to test before that. So GPO settings are very common. With group policy preferences, they've introduced a way to configure power policies. Again, users can change those just like any other preference with group policy. And there's also the you can set power policies through group policy itself. A very simple power plan. For obvious reasons, if you're going to implement config manager power management, you're going to want to disable your group policy power settings because they will conflict with each other directly. Think of your config manager agent coming on, enforcing your power policy specified, then 90 minutes later, GPO goes in and overwrites it. What kind of happens is the machines never go to sleep because there's just always a conflict of power policy settings. So make sure you disable that. You can use GP result to see if that's something that's impacting your environment when you're troubleshooting issues, for example. So collection hierarchy. We know in config manager we have device collections. So what you want to actually do is configure as a best practice, configure a power management device collection hierarchy. The reason being is you almost are going to assign power policies based on collection. That's how the power policies are configured, and we'll show that a little later on. Having a hierarchy to actually understand which machines belong to what collection, and a very friendly way of identifying what power policy or business unit you want to apply those power policies to is very, very important. So that's, as a best practice, create a hierarchy in your config manager environment for power settings. So the next one is configuring client wake-up settings. So we talk about how config manager can enforce power policies. We talk about how config manager can also wake up devices prior to advertisements and software deployments. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't actually tell the client to allow a magic packet to wake a device up. Or if a machine is shut down, you'll need to enable in the BIOS wake on LAN to allow a magic packet to wake a device up. So you're going to have to configure this in advance of any sort of power policy enforcement, especially if you want to use wake on LAN to wake devices up. Otherwise, you're just going to have systems sleeping all the time. An exclusion policy is extremely important in your organization. Most of you guys are IT admins, I assume. You don't want to be on the operational side, you don't want to be the ones that have to make a decision about excluding a system. If you have an end user or VIP call up, say, hey, I want my system excluded from power policy, or you have a legitimate reason for it, your operations guys are not the ones that should be making that call of saying, yes, I'm going to exclude you, or no, I'm not. So have an exclusion policy, and on the same side of it, you're going to want to communicate out to your end user environment what that exclusion policy is, and any other FAQ about configuring power management. I can't tell you how many times people just want to know, how do I know if a machine's sleeping? If you're looking at a computer or a desktop or a power button on a laptop, you'll see it blinking, a very steady green light. That means it's sleeping, right? End users don't know that. End users go in and they see their monitors are turned off, they wiggle their mouse and they're back up and running. So to give people an understanding of how to identify a system as in its different power states, communicate out an FAQ. Also include information like who to call for help, maybe what your power policies are for your different business requirements. That way you can always, I don't want to say our end users are great at reading communications out for most of us, but you have some sort of reference to point those end users in if they ever have any questions about what you're doing. You also should include any sort of corporate sponsorship in this communication. So people need to understand why you're doing this, and including some sort of statement about your corporate's green initiative or sustainability initiative sort of validates why you're doing it. One kind of side tip about communication I just want to share is I had one customer that actually we decided to communicate out that they were enforcing power policy on systems about 3 weeks prior to the actual enforcement start date. And the funny thing that happened is at that time the help desk received about 20 different people that called and said that power management was actually causing problems on their systems, but they didn't actually turn on power policy enforcement. It's like the toaster effect. You implement anything into an environment, and they're going to blame you for whatever you do. So this is it is a little, you try to be as not intrusive as possible to end users with power management, but definitely communicate out and use that as an example. Maybe communicate out a little earlier on than when you actually do it. The final thing, again, going back to this first statement, don't just turn it on. Even after you finish all your testing and all your piloting, you want to do a scheduled and phased implementation. Don't turn it on everywhere because you don't want to overwhelm your help center in case they get calls about problems or if there's any issues. Have a schedule, post it, make people aware. The one thing that might hold that I see organizations have problems with is lack of communication. It's always a trouble spot, sharing out, especially within IT, and within IT, how to communicate what you guys are doing. You might have a change control meeting. You might have a technical forum, a desktop support forum. Communicate out. The more communication you have on it, the better. So everyone's very well aware of what's going on. I promise that's the longest talking point on a slide I have. All the rest is really for resources for you guys, because you're going to get these slides out after the conference. So I wanted to make sure this was a good technical reference for you guys as you go through the implementation process for reference. So we're going to talk about config manager power plans. Remember, this is the part of the power policy agent, the actual enforcement of power policy on systems. What config manager power plans give you is an enforced power management setting. We're talking about display go to sleep after XX minutes of inactivity, or a computer go to sleep after XX minutes of inactivity. Config manager allows you to do up to 2 different scheduled schemes. So you can have a peak scheme and an off-peak scheme. Usually that's your day and your evening scheme. You don't need to do both. You can have one or the other. And there are, out of the box, config manager includes 3 predefined plans, which I don't recommend anybody use. It includes the ability to create your own power plan. Even if you're just copying the settings from an existing power plan, config manager includes, the advantage here is you can rename that power plan and almost brand it like your corporation's IT department's daytime power policy or this department's power policy. Giving it some sort of special name also shows that it's on purpose that you're assigning this power policy, not just a generic Microsoft power management term, power policy term. So I highly recommend that. There are a significant amount of advanced settings that you can configure as part of these power schemes. On all honesty, I only recommend you really do the top 2 unless you have a strong desire to enforce other settings. The main reason is that you want to still empower your end users to make some decisions on their own, especially when it comes to power management. So a lot of these settings, and I'm going to talk about a few of these specifically when I go through my demo of configuring these, but some of these you probably are not going to want to enforce or configure. The other part of a power plan, so you have your day and evening time, they also include in this in release something called a maintenance wake. What a maintenance wake is exactly what you think. It's a wake up, having the computer wake up at a specific time. It uses what's called a wake timer. A wake timer is almost like an alarm clock internal to the computer. It only works while the computer is sleeping, and it will say something like at 3 o'clock in the morning local time, wake up. The thing about wake timers and maintenance wakes with System Center Configuration Manager is it only works with desktops, and it says very specifically that you're not going to wake up a system that's a laptop. Also, with Windows 7 and higher, out of the box, Microsoft's default power plan settings for laptops is to not allow wake timers. Anybody know why you don't want to allow a wake timer with a laptop? I think I heard it. So you don't want to accidentally wake a laptop up while it's in its bag and let it drain its battery. That's the main reason why you don't want to use a wake timer. Typically with laptops, you want to just rely on wake on LAN because you'll know that the network is directly connected in and there's a reason for it to wake up at that point. I will say that, just as some insight, with laptops with Windows 7 and higher, even though it's disabled by default, you do have the ability through power settings to configure wake timers for laptops on power only. So while you definitely don't want to allow a device to wake up while it's on battery, it may be useful to configure the wake timers for laptops while they're on power, and you don't necessarily need to use Config Manager to schedule a wake time, maintenance wake timer. There's other ways to do this. So you may want to use it almost a hybrid approach, come up with your own strategy, use other solutions to wake a device up, and then you can still wake up your laptops when they're plugged into the corporate network and on power. So I want to talk about excluded systems just for a few minutes. When you think of exclusions, you think about systems that you're not enforcing power policy on. What we typically recommend to customers, though, is to create an enforced exclusion policy. Meaning, instead of letting customers do whatever they want, if a customer says they don't want to have a machine go to sleep, create a power policy that says never go to sleep. There's a couple of reasons for that. You can be an authoritative source saying you don't want your system to sleep, we're going to make sure it doesn't go to sleep. That's one. The second is more around the display timeout. So even though your computers don't go to sleep, you can still conserve some electricity with displays timing out. And that's the main reason why. Another example is you may want to create a kiosk policy where you have both the display and the CPU never go to sleep. Maybe only during the daytime you want the display to go to sleep. So those are two ways to do an exclusion policy within Config Manager. The other way is, as I kind of talked about at the beginning, is just set up a collection that says don't enforce power policy settings on these devices and let the end users decide. So you do have that option, as part of an exclusion policy. With 2012, Microsoft implemented a user opt-out option. So if everyone's familiar with 2012, there is a application that gets deployed out to all your endpoint devices, the Software Center. On the last tab, there's an actual option for power management. And if you can configure the user opt-out, users can actually check off that box and they will not have power policy enabled. You may say to yourself, why would I go through the struggles of enforcing power policy and have that? If it's as simple as a cultural reason saying, well, we're going to do whatever we can, the best effort we can to enforce power policy settings and save some electricity, if it's as simple as saying let the end user decide if they don't want it, you may want to understandably allow that option and communicate out how to exclude yourself. It also takes some stress off of your operations teams and help centers because then they'll know, you just instruct users how to exclude themselves out of power policy. It's along the lines of Microsoft's real mantra around trying to get to user-based computing. This is one of the examples of how they're trying to accomplish that. Something cool is that this checkbox is actually, you can go through WMI, and if you guys are familiar with WMI and scripting, you can actually find out and query if that checkbox is checked off or not, which you might be able to use for other sort of operations or maintenance tasks. So I can show you guys that after the fact, after the session, if you really want to learn where that resides in the WMI namespaces. Reasons to exclude a system. We talked about this a little more, but you might have some applications such as engineering processes. AutoCAD or another CAD process takes a long time to render, and if the machine goes to sleep while it's maybe saving to a network location, because that's a great best practice, you don't want to be responsible for that, so that might be a reason why you want to exclude the system. It could be a business process. So we work with a lot of counties that have E911 operators. We obviously don't want those systems to go to sleep, so that might be a business reason to do it. Requiring 24/7 remote access. So we're going to talk about the Wake on LAN proxy a little later on, but if you want to give users a reason, if they require 24/7 access where they don't want to have the ability to wake their systems up prior, you may want to exclude them for power management. There's also cultural reasons. You might have a VIP or an admin who you don't want to impact them. I know I'd rather not impact my company's admin versus my VPs. So make sure you know about the cultural reasons and other reasons that are maybe not legitimate reasons to exclude people from power management, but for your the sanctity of your jobs and well-being, you definitely want to exclude those people. And again, come up with a policy to exclude people. Again, don't put that burden on yourself. Don't be the one that says, yes, you can be excluded. It's really important because you don't want to be stressed out when you implement power management. You have plenty of other reasons to be stressed out in this world. Power management shouldn't be one of them. So with that, I'm going to do a quick demo on how to configure power management policies in Config Manager. As I kind of started at the beginning of this talk, it's not very much to configure power policies within Config Manager. So it's not a huge demo per se, but it's more for your own reference to understand. So this is my 2012 SP1 evaluation demo that our friend Wally has set up for us to use. And in here I've created, as I talked about before, a power management hierarchy here under device collections. And again, the point here is to have names that really relate to what the power policy is or your business function. I'm going to just go into one of these. We'll go with this excluded systems policy and go into the properties of the collection. But all the power management settings reside in the power management tab of a collection right here. You can also copy existing settings from another collection with this option right here as well. So here's where I was talking about. You could not specify power management settings, and that's the default setting, right? Because there's a power management tab in every collection, and you don't have power management enabled right now. So this is where that would be, to not specify power management settings. If you're going to never apply power management settings to a machine, again, the exclusion policy where you let users pick their own settings, that's where you would specify it there. But as I recommended, I would recommend specifying an exclusion policy. And if you click here, you can see this is the three different out-of-the-box Config Manager power plans. They're very similar to your Windows 7, what comes in out of the box with Windows 7 for reference. And then this is the customized one. Before I renamed it, it would say something like customized or configuration one. As you can see, you can't edit any of these out-of-the-box settings. You can only edit your customizable one. An interesting thing about these settings, and like I was talking about, this case, we're excluding machines by always enforcing a display timeout of 20 minutes, but having the system go to sleep never, and that's what the zero means in these power settings. It's kind of interesting because you see these up and down buttons. You can actually say 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 4. It's actually not true. Even though you can specify 7 minutes or 33 minutes, if you look through the power policy settings right now in any of your systems, those predefined intervals are the ones you can configure. So it'll just round up to the correct setting. If you specify 33, I think you go up to 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Require a password on wake up I wanted to talk about because this is a common setting that's also controlled by group policy. And our best practice is to actually enforce this setting in one system or the other. Earlier on in Windows 7, there was actually a conflict where if you had enforced it through a power policy and enforced it through group policy, you would see duplicate logons with Windows. So you'd log a machine, log on, and then you'd get right back to a lock workstation. That since has been fixed, but as a good general best practice, you should just have one system be the authoritative source for this particular section here. And every organization is different. I mean, for security reasons, you're going to probably want to lock the workstation when it removes rooms from standby. But for ease of access systems or different use cases like community colleges or labs, you may not want that with shared logins. These three options here, power button, start menu, and sleep, and lid close, again, these are designed to give people enforcement, especially with laptop lid close. I remember, so before working at Virgin, I was in corporate IT for some pretty big companies, doing operating system deployment, software delivery, and everything, endpoint management, desktop engineering. And it was always very tricky to say we want the lid close action of a laptop to do nothing. And that's usually a general, by default action. But my recommendation is always to let users pick for themselves. You can configure it if you have a real reason to. Maybe there's a specific use case like a kiosk or an HR system that you want to enforce these settings on. But for every other reason, and you don't want to use loopback, group policy, I wouldn't set these. Again, turning off disk, don't worry about that. That's something we don't really need to configure anymore. You don't really save much power with spinning down the hard drive. You can use it, and there's a couple trains of thoughts on hard drives. People think that if you keep constantly spinning on the hard drive, it reduces the overall wear and tear of the hard drive. And on the opposite side, people say if you spin it down more often, it's going to increase the lifespan. There's really not really a good answer either way. We don't necessarily recommend or have a need to spin down hard drives, but you can configure it here. This one right here, I'm going to skip a couple of these because they're pretty self-explanatory, but this required idleness to sleep percentage is a worthless setting. It's only available for Windows Vista, and it's a pretty useful setting if it was implemented properly, because it would prevent sleep from happening if a machine's processor utilization is only over a certain threshold. There are third parties and Microsoft partners that build upon this as part of their enhancements to System Center, Configuration Manager, Power Management. But this one in particular is just for Vista, so it's, again, not a worthwhile percentage here. And the enable Windows wake-up timer for desktops. Again, we talked about how maintenance wakes are only allowed for desktops with Config Manager. This is where you can configure it if you want to disable it on battery and on power. I don't know why they didn't add one for laptops, because you can take advantage of that through configure through different commands there. So, but this is the advanced settings here. So here's where you'd specify a peak plan and a non-peak plan. And this one is, for example, a duration of 24 hours. So that's why it only allows you to pick one. But you can do your start day to be 9 and then 5 if you wanted to for a typical office worker, and then the non-peak plan comes out. The wake-up time, 3 o'clock a.m. You could also use that in case you want to wake devices up prior to people coming in. It's another use of that maintenance wake. Some customers are going to rely on the wake on LAN settings and powering up systems prior to advertisement start time. But the wake-up time could be midnight or overnight for maintenance, or it could be in the morning if you want to wake systems up before people come in. So that's it for the demo on configuring power policy. It's really, like I said, it's only a few clicks, like so many other Microsoft products. I wanted to show you, though, where the client configuration settings are for excluding, allowing user opt-out. So that's under the client settings of Config Manager. If you go into the properties there, under Power Management, you have this one tab. And before SP1 came out, you basically had these two options here: allow power management devices and allow users to exclude their device from power management. That's where you'd enable it if you want users to have that option. When we talk about wake-up proxy, this is the actual configuration as well for enabling the wake on LAN proxy of 2012 SP1. Again, it's only a yes or no, really, and a port and a firewall configuration. So it's very simple settings to configure for power management within the console. Okay. So some other useful information about power policies. If a computer belongs to multiple power policy collections, it's going to take the least restrictive values. So if you have one policy that's 30 minutes sleep and another that's never, it's going to go never. If you have multiple wake-up times, the one closest to midnight will be used. Power settings, if you ever want to try this in your lab or test it out, power settings are applied with machine policy, so you can always initiate a machine policy to see how it gets configured. Users can change their settings if they have permission to do so, as long as you don't have any restrictions around that. And every 24 hours, those power policies will be reinforced. So if they do change their settings 24 hours later, it will reinforce those settings to go back to what you specify. There are a couple of logs that you should be aware of for troubleshooting power management settings. Power management log, these are client logs, power management log, and power provider logs. These, again, the WMI provider log, and anything power manager gets stored in that log file. That's more for reference. There's a Power View tool, which is part of the Config Manager toolkit. If you're going to look at logs, I'd actually recommend you use this tool instead, because you can remotely connect to systems, and it will analyze the log for you and give you a schedule of actual power activity that happens on systems, a chart of activity, and you can see the actual active power settings. And another tip is that even if you don't enforce power policy settings, you can still use this tool to remotely view the active power policy settings on a device. There just would be no, since the last two, the activity chart and the power events go off of the logs that Config Manager, the agent actually writes, there'd be no information in there. Okay. So now we're going to talk about wake up with Config Manager. So config manager wake up is a way to wake devices up prior to advertisement start time. It's configurable, so you can say, wake a device up 5 minutes prior to advertisement start time, or 3 minutes, or however many minutes you want. When you guys create advertisements in 2007 or software deployments, there's a checkbox you're probably familiar with. It's that enable wake on LAN checkbox, or in 2012, it's send wake up packets. That's the checkbox that this service kind of pulls off of. So when you start configuring power management, that's the checkbox you're going to use to configure advertisements to wake up. You may ask, why would I just not want everything to wake up with advertisements? You may have some maintenance tasks or reoccurring, what I call non-important tasks that you just want to get hit from a machine randomly through the day or in the morning that are not intrusive to end users. So only use the enable wake on LAN checkbox for those advertisements you want to wake systems up or software deployments. I still call them advertisements, so I apologize if that's not the right terminology right now with 2012. Wake up is configured in site server settings, so when you go into your site server, there's a wake on LAN tab, which we'll show in a little bit. You can configure wake up for either vPro, which is AMT, it's called AMT, or Magic Packet, or both, which will mean it will try vPro first, and then if it can't wake a machine up through AMT, it will use Magic Packet to wake a device up. So a little bit about vPro and AMT. What that is that's an Intel hardware configuration. You have to buy hardware that supports Intel, AMT or vPro, whichever it's called. The thing is, you can't just buy the hardware and expect it to work. You need to provision it. I'm sure everyone that researched a little about vPro has an understanding of how to provision vPro to allow using that management engine when the machine's shut down. So if you're going to use vPro, it does need to be provisioned, and there's an infrastructure required for that, or some tools that you need to run to configure AMT. As far as power management with config manager is concerned, what vPro AMT gives you is the ability to send a wake up to the machine prior to the advertisement start time. That's the only power on control you're really worried about in this case. So it'll just send a power on control through AMT to wake up a device if it's provisioned to do so. It does require an out-of-band management point. And actually, it's kind of funny when you configure power management on your site server, even if you're just using Magic Packet, it's going to warn you that you need to configure an out-of-band management point to use vPro or AMT. You don't need that with Magic Packet, so you do need that with AMT, though. So the other option is Magic Packet. What that is it'll send a Magic Packet directly from the site server. We're going to talk about Magic Packet in the next slide. It uses UDP port 7 or 9, so it's a port that's configured for Magic Packet. You could also use custom ports, but these are the most common ones, are 7 or 9. And with Config Manager, you can use a subnet directed or a unicast way of delivering a Magic Packet to a device. So what is a Magic Packet? The way I explain to customers that are not sure what a Magic Packet is, you obviously see it in the BIOSes, enabling wake on LAN, we talked about that a little bit. A Magic Packet is basically a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call to a computer to wake it up. It's a UDP broadcast message that contains the MAC address of a target device to be woken up. It includes the source or destination IP address, source and destination IP address, and what port it's coming from. So on this other side here, I don't know if I can show. Yeah, here we go. So this is an actual example of a Magic Packet right here. You can see the source IP. This is where we're coming from. This would be your config manager site servers, for example. Destination IP. This would be where it's targeted. And in this case, when we talk about a way a Magic Packet can be delivered, that's where that gets implemented, is the destination IP. The destination port 7 or 9, like I said, and then this is the target MAC address of the network card that it's trying to wake up. 3 ways a Magic Packet can be delivered. So in this case, in this example, this is a subnet-directed broadcast. What you can see is that's the .255 at the end. So it's basically sending a subnet to the entire subnet, but it's targeting the MAC address of that device. So that's how you can tell that from the actual Magic Packet itself. Limited broadcast, what that is that's if this was not an IP address, this would be something like your subnet 255, 255, 255, 255, which is everything, right? And then unicast would be if the actual IP address of the target end device. And it would be something like, instead of 255, it would be 100, 101, whatever that known IP address is. This came from a magic packet sniffing tool that I like to use, and I actually at the end of the slide deck have a list of resources in the slide deck of how to, some topics we're going to be talking about, covering. So the magic packet sniffer that I use, I include in that resource list. It's a freeware application, but this is an example of what a magic pack would look like if you're sniffing magic packets for troubleshooting reasons. So like I talked about, you have two different ways to configure config manager magic packets. You have subnet directed or unicast. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both. And then when we talk about Wake on LAN proxy, it's a completely separate conversation. So without talking about Wake on LAN proxy, because it's a new feature for SP1 right now, most likely if you're using magic packet, you're going to use subnet directed. That's where you get the most success of waking up systems. A broadcast is sent to the entire subnet. So if you have 254 machines on a broadcast network, that magic packet is going to go to all 254 machines, but it's only going to wake up that one with the MAC address of the target. The reason it's successful is because it's just sending a target out to everything, right? The disadvantage is that most environments actually prevent subnet-directed broadcasts to occur on the network level. There are security reasons behind it. Think of ICMP attacks. A magic packet is just an ICMP type of packet that gets released out. So most networks administrators are not going to configure their intermediary switches and routers to allow magic packets. You can configure ACLs on routers and switches to allow sources of magic packets for broadcast. So that's one way that, and it's actually a best practice when you read up on TechNet about using subnet directed, is to actually add some security to it to make sure it's only the site server that's sending the magic packet. But as we all know with 2012, Config Manager 2012, there's a lot of advantages to not having secondary sites out there and having maybe one site server and distribution points with senders. So it's a challenge is the fact that your primary site may not be in the same even location as your endpoint device, and it may not get the subnet broadcast. So that's the main disadvantage. But it's really the only way you're going to get Magic Packet to work without the Wake on LAN proxy infrastructure. Unicast. So the advantage is it's basically your site server is handing off the packet to the server's networking subsystem and saying, just deliver this out to the target IP address. There's no special routing or networking changes that need to be configured to make it work. The big disadvantage is a significant high failure rate because the server can't resolve that IP address, doesn't know where to go to, can't route it properly because the ARP table on switches doesn't get funneled back up to the servers, and they can't resolve the IP addresses. And it's also not supported by all NICs. Wake on ARP, for example, you may need to configure that. I can tell you most customers that have tried unicast Magic Packet for waking systems up are very unsuccessful. But at the same token, if you are just trying to do something and have the ability, you can turn on Wake on LAN and sit in Config Manager, turn on unicast because it doesn't require any sort of permissions on your routing level. You may wake up systems that may not have been woken up just by trying it. So it's the least effort to try it, I guess. And so if anything, you should use it. But it just doesn't work very well, quite honestly. All right, so now we're going to demo how we configure Wake on LAN in your site server settings. Okay. So here's my primary site server, or Contoso, right? And I'm going to go into properties here. And in the properties, you have a Wake on LAN tab. It's only like one checkbox to configure enable Wake on LAN. And here's, as I was talking about before, if you want to use AMT to power on commands, you get that little message box saying you need an out-of-band management point, especially if you don't have one configured. Use AMT commands only, or use wake up packets. And that's the Magic Packet. So this is where you configure it. And this is whether you configure it as a subnet directed or a unicast. Right there, and that's it. Once you click OK and apply, you've enabled Wake on LAN in your site. The advanced settings I was talking about before, as far as the configuration that you can customize a little bit. You can specify how many times the magic packet will be retried and what the delay is prior to the advertisement start time. So in this case, it's 1. I think out of the box it's 5. I was just changing it for demo purposes. This would be the threads, that the amount of magic packets that can be sent at a maximum number of times. So if you don't want to send 10,000 magic packets every 10 seconds, you can change this and configure it a little differently. The amount of threads the site server will use to send those magic packets can be configured here. Think about if you have older hardware, or your site servers need to really think about resources on there. 3 is out of the box default settings. And the transmission offset is, so the transmission offset is where it will say wake up 5 minutes prior to start time. The delay on top here that I was referring to is so if you're going to retry 3 times, it'd be, in this case, a minute delay each time it sends 3 magic packets. There's really no disadvantage to sending multiple magic packets out when you want to wake a device up. There's always the chance that the first one won't get delivered, so it's good to have backups in place just to send those magic packets out. And most of Microsoft partners that enhance Config Manager do rely on the same type of methods there. And that's it as far as configuring Wake on LAN in Config Manager 22. I told you these demos are not going to be very exciting. The Ports tab, just real quickly, this is where you can configure the port for Wake on LAN. Again, 9, or you can do anything you want here, but 9 or 7 are the most common ones. Especially if you're going to use subnet directed, and most likely you will. You can configure, your network team might say something like, let's not use 9 or 7, let's use a different port, but 9 or 7 are the most common to use out of the box. And that's it for Wake on LAN enabling, Wake on LAN. So it's a good time for my demo environment to shut down because we don't need it anymore. I can always spin it up again if we need it. In fact, I'll do that just in case. So we talked about configuring the client wake up. Again, Config Manager does not configure the client wake up. It does with the Wake on LAN proxy, but most normally, you're going to have to configure devices to know to wake up from Magic Packet. So when you think about the BIOS settings for enabling Wake on LAN, it's specifically for waking up a device from a shutdown state. Okay, if it's powered off, it needs to have power obviously plugged in. You can't plug a computer off, at the the plug, for example, and expect it to wake up. It does have to have power going to it. But if you want to enable Wake on LAN from a shutdown state, this is where you'd configure it in the BIOS. All the major manufacturers provide some sort of utility that allows you to configure BIOS settings through script or from Config Manager. Dell calls theirs OMCI, HP's BCU, and Lenovo is called BIOS Setup. And you're going to want to enable Wake on LAN in the BIOS if you want the systems to power up, again, just from shutdown states. The one other thing to talk about is with Dell specifically, they have this setting called low power mode. It's a very important setting. They decided that when you enable low power mode, you can conserve maybe another 1/4 watt of electricity by turning off the network card when the system is sleeping. That's not a good thing for us because then we can't wake up the devices when they're sleeping from Magic Packets. So if you're doing a proof of concept and your Dell machines are not waking up and you know they're getting Magic Packets, you're using a sniff tool to validate it, check to make sure low power mode is not enabled, and that will be a way to get your systems to wake up from off states. I keep saying off states because you don't necessarily need to configure Wake on LAN in your BIOSes to take advantage of power management and to wake systems up from sleeping. In Windows, when the machine's awake, or when it's sleeping, the power management tab of the network card in Device Manager is what allows it to wake it up when it's sleeping. So if you don't have the ability to manage BIOSes and you're not so much worried about machines waking up from shutdown states because you're going to be configuring power policies to put machines to sleep, then all you need to do is worry about configuring the power management tab and potentially the driver settings for the network card in Device Manager. So there's many different ways to configure the client wake-up settings. Most likely you're going to use a script that enumerates through the registry or uses a utility called power config to enumerate all the network cards and enable the 3 tabs on power management, which I'm going to skip ahead to a slide just to show you. It's these three tabs here that I'm referring to. Oops, back one. These three tabs here. Allow the computer to turn on this device. This is what enables you to wake a device up from a network card to allow it to wake it up. And then only allow a magic packet to wake the computer. That's actually pretty important because most people still have XP systems they support in their environment. And one of the major problems with XP, with enabling power management, is not so much that the machines go to sleep, but regardless of what you configure in these three checkboxes, if you have the advanced driver settings here, these advanced settings always usurp that. So you might have a situation where a machine goes to sleep and then just wakes right back up, because back with XP, all network traffic, what they call it, would basically wake a device up. It basically had the ability to do so. With Windows 7, they've restricted the types of packets that can wake a device up, so it's not as much, not as important with Windows 7 as it is with XP. But if you have trouble with machines waking up right after they go to sleep, check the Advanced tab and just see if there's anything that's saying wake on all network traffic or all directed traffic. I'm going back a minute. So there's a utility called Power Config we're going to talk about in a little bit. It's a very useful utility. You can use it from a command line to actually enable a device to those three checkboxes to wake up a device. It's actually how the Wake on LAN proxy configures device to be enabled for Wake on LAN. And like I said, leverage community scripts. I have an example of a TechNet script that was published to configure the client wake-up tabs in this slide deck. So you're going to most likely use a script that configures it for you, so you don't have to go around and manually click on the power management tabs. We already talked about Wake on LAN not needing to be enabled in BIOS from standby. Again, you can just configure client wake-up tabs and put machines to sleep, and you can wake devices up. We talked about the NIC driver advanced configuration trumping the power management tab. The other thing to talk about is with Intel NICs, there is an enable PME option. You need to make sure that's enabled. That's how you're going to get machines to wake up from Wake on LAN. In fact, that power management tab may not even be available to check off devices if that's disabled. So as a good best practice, make sure enable PME is enabled. Also on here, so we talked about the network card. A good useful trick is to use your keyboards and mice. So when a machine's sleeping out of the box, you have to push the power button generally to wake a device up. You can actually configure keyboards and mouse, if they're supported, to wake devices up. And that would be a keyboard click or a mouse click, not necessarily a mouse roll. Don't tell people just move the mouse, because that may not work. You actually have to click on it, most likely. And there's a power config, like I said, to device enable. So in this case, if I want to use power config to enable this standard PS2 keyboard to wake a device up, I would just type this exact command from an elevated command prompt, and it would check that box off. And for XP, there's something called USB BIOS X. I have the KB article included in the reference here, but what that is if you notice the power management tab's not on your USB keyboards and mice or other devices you want to wake your systems up with, it's because XP needs this registry key enabled to support it and see it. So you'll enable USB BIOS X to basically allow that, and it's a registry key value that you just add, and once you reboot, it takes effect. So Wake on LAN proxy. This is a really cool new feature from Config Manager 2012 SP1. What it is an agent-based solution. This has always been I want to say a deficiency in Config Manager power management. Because of all the issues you have, you can't wake devices up with subnet-directed broadcast very easily. And all of your Microsoft partners that enhance power management have some sort of solution like this. So they recognize that they needed to put it into the box, and they came up with this kind of solution here. It's based on a Microsoft research project called the Green Up Project. So if you do go to Microsoft's research site, you can actually read a little bit about the white papers about how they came up with this technology. It's another service that gets installed on your agent. So yeah, it's another client agent. It's called the Config Manager Wake-Up Proxy. And we talked about configuring those power management tabs. This service will actually configure it for you. So if you do want to enable Wake on LAN proxy, this will configure those power management tabs for you instead of using a script. But you probably want to follow that up with a script as well to make sure if it can't configure it, you have backup to make sure it does get enabled. The way it works is it automatically elects 3 Guardian systems to stay awake all the time using something called an override. And whenever you install this agent, it's going to, or once you configure it, the agents actually communicate with each other on the network, which is why you need to configure a firewall rule for it. So what it does, this is the cool part. When the devices go to sleep, a Guardian agent, proxy agent, recognizes that the device is sleeping because it's pinging it constantly. I think it's every 5 seconds the Guardian PCs ping all the devices locally. And what it does is once it recognizes it's not longer available, it sends a broadcast Ethernet header of the sleeping client's MAC address to the switch. So that basically gives you that issue where your switch doesn't know with unicast the device's IP address or how to resolve the IP address to the MAC address. It basically does that for you. And it's the same thing as if you were to plug a network cable, a patch cable into a switch. It's the same exact thing as doing that. So that's how this agent kind of spoofs. It's spoofing on I think it's the second layer of the OSI model, which I guess is okay. But that's how it's doing it. So once the Guardian PC sends this, whenever a directed network TCP connection is targeted to a sleeping machine, the Guardian PC intercepts it, says this machine's sleeping, and then it wakes it up locally. So what's really an example of a use case of this is you would configure, with power management, for example, you would configure unicast, because then you don't have to worry about subnet directed broadcasts getting to systems when there's network level problems. And unicast will theoretically work with these proxy agents, intercepting that traffic. It will get the magic packet request and say, oh, this device is sleeping, I'm going to wake it up, and then it'll be available. Some other use cases are RDP. So let's say you want to initiate an RDP connection to a sleeping machine. It's going to see that port. It's going to recognize that it was an active port on the machine before it went to sleep. It's then going to wake the device up, and then you can RDP onto it. One thing to say, though, it's not going to be an instantaneous RDP connection. So if your end users go and wake a device or go to RDP on a device that's sleeping, it's going to say connection failed. They're going to have to try again once the machine comes up and the network stack initializes, then they'll be able to access it. So that's kind of a little bit of a caveat here. It's also relatively new technology. I mean, it's something that's going to have to be kind of tested and tried in the field to see if it works, doesn't cause any other issues. I have a feeling like, for another example is, if you try to go in computer management and you right-click on a device and say connect to another machine via WMI, again, the proxy would see that you're trying to connect to it and it would wake the device up. So I have a feeling that it may make more machines wake up for more reasons, which is good for IT administrators, but it may also result in some insomnia issues as well, which we'll talk about later on. It does not support Windows XP. So if you have an XP environment, you can't use it. It does support Windows 7, 8, Server 2008 R2, and 2012. Other considerations to think about: it does not support 802.1x environments, wireless networks, guest VMs, which is really interesting if you're trying to try and prove this technology out. You can't use virtual machines to test, which when I was doing my research for this presentation, I had to actually get 5 PCs in my home lab to physically connect them to a switch for this to see how it worked. And if you have any sort of Mac-based port authentication where you're tying MAC addresses to ports for security reasons, it won't work because the Guardian machines are saying, hey, I'm now this MAC address. So keep that in mind. That's where it will not work. But it completely solves the issue of waking systems up without using a subnet-directed broadcast. So it's a really nice solution to that problem from config manager's perspective. So troubleshooting Wake on LAN. There's a tool. I showed you that magic packet, Wake on LAN Sniffer. It's a free tool you can download. I have the link in there. Config manager doesn't know your systems are sleeping, right? So if you try to troubleshoot a machine with its powered on and try to send a magic packet to it, you should be able to see it, regardless of the machine's sleeping. There's no client firewall that you need to configure for magic packets to wake a device up. However, your hardware firewalls, if they're blocking UDP port 7 or 9 or whatever, you need to make sure those are configured properly. There are some server-side logs to look at as well. So if you're going to troubleshoot, which advertisements are triggering wake on LANs and which collections are getting those wake-ups. Wall manager log and wall C manager log. Again, it's more, I'm sure you guys are familiar with troubleshooting and looking at config manager logs. It's so much fun to look at these log files, but they're there for troubleshooting purposes if you really have a need for it. And we already talked about the BIOS configuration in the client wake-up tab with the NIC driver advanced tab. I already showed this to you guys where we can show you the power management client settings, how you configure those. This is just for reference when you do your research. So now we're going to talk about reporting. I'd say if the one thing that System Center Config Manager does, it gives you a way to report on power management. It's not great, but it will meet your purposes for implementing a power management solution. There are about 5, there are different reports, but they're basically these 5 reports. There's a power capabilities report that will give you a list of all power management capabilities of a collection. There's a power settings report that displays aggregated list of power settings used by computers in a collection. There's power computer activity, and this is the one you're going to use for baselining to understand what your usage patterns are in systems. When you do this report, it'll basically say something like, and this is the report right here. You can see on the bottom line, for example, this bottom line is when the machines are powered on. Is when the machines are in use from user activity. The next line up is the monitors being turned on, and that's pretty typical because most likely you have a monitor timeout already configured in your environment. So it should pretty much follow your user activity where the monitor is only on when the user is actually using the system. And this blue line is the CPU on. So this would be indicative of a machine being always on, for example. There's a consumption cost and emissions report. So to get understanding of how much you're actually saving, how much you're consuming with electricity, these are these types of reports. It's more for, I don't think so much for the IT guys, but for your managers, for the energy managers, for your CFOs. They want to see how you're doing with power management. That's the report you're going to use. And insomnia, it's going to identify systems. We're going to talk about insomnia in a second. Insomnia is a condition where machines don't go to sleep. And this report gives you a list of machines that don't go to sleep. It's sort of useful to understand which machines aren't going to sleep, but as an example, the wake on LAN proxy, keeping machines awake, those are going to be considered insomnia because they're not going to sleep. So this report gives you all those lists of machines to reference. So a couple things about reporting. When you want to actually get more detailed and include like utility rates or watt draw considerations, how much electricity a machine's actually consuming when it's powered on, you're going to configure those in SQL reporting services, those constants in SQL reporting services. My recommendation to you is to leverage your hardware manufacturer's eco declaration sheets or environmental declaration sheets. They'll tell you what their reported watt draw values are, and you can use those values as at least some sort of information to come up with a blended utility rate. So you can't come up with per device level tracking, okay, or for consumption values. You're going to have to come up with some sort of number that is a representative of your entire environment. When you look at these echo declaration sheets, there's an idle power draw value. That's the value you're going to want to use because you never want to overstate your power consumption or your savings. You want to go on the side of conservation or being conservative and use the values that the manufacturer says is this is the least amount of electricity the system will use when it's plugged in. You could always purchase a watt draw meter and plug it in for all your models and get real values if you would rather use real values. And a good average here, I just displayed here, if you just need some watt draw values that we use with our customers on average for displays and CPUs for each different types, this is what we'd recommend for that. For the CO2 emissions rate, when you configure those constants, you can go to the EPA, you can type your zip code, and it will give you a rate to use for how clean your energy is. And if you don't get an energy rate, electricity rate from your facilities teams, you can always just use a national average. The EIA reports on the average cost of electricity monthly. You can go to their website and get a state-by-state map. And of course, this is obviously just for the US. For international, you're going to need to get that information from your own providers. Speaking on international for a second, there's no way to really configure both peak draw values and off-peak values. That's always very common, especially in Europe. So you're going to just come up with kind of a best guess at those utility costs when you configure reporting. So an example way to figure out what values to use for watt draw consumption is to create a spreadsheet, come up with your counts and figure the watt draw values here, and that's how you can come up with your blended values for your entire environment. It's really the best effort you can use to come up with as much detailed or accurate reporting on consumption values with Config Manager. A couple of other information tidbits. So data used for daily reports is stored in your Config Manager database for 31 days. If it was anything more than that, your database would be full of power management information. And we already know how much fun it is to manage our Config Manager databases. So 31 days for daily, and for monthly reports, they're stored for 13 months. So you can have basically an annual report, if you'd like, of your consumption values. So for the last 15 minutes, we're going to talk about some pro tips, field lessons, just some advice that I like to give customers, and we can talk certainly later on about this. So power config is a command line utility that controls everything power. It's extremely useful when you are using Windows 7 and higher. I mean, it's useful with XP as well, but really useful with Vista and Windows 7 and higher. And you can configure anything power management. So we talked about enabling a device wake. You could also disable a device wake up. You can enable or disable hibernate if you want to use hibernate in your environment. And for troubleshooting, for example, if you do power config /A, it'll just tell you, for example, if the system supports standby. So if the machine's not going to sleep, that would be my first step to troubleshoot, is to see if the system actually supports standby, which is called S3. With Windows 7 and higher, for example, you can troubleshoot what caused the machine to wake up last. So you have a last wake command. The energy request is, so we talked about for a second, so different things will keep a machine from going to sleep, like your wake on LAN proxy agent will create a request to prevent sleep from happening because you want to keep it awake. This will give you a list of those requests. Energy is basically a report of everything power on the system. It will give you some information on why a system may not go to sleep, or problems with conflicts with drivers that may not support wake on LAN or power management. And wake timers is, we talked about wake timers before, it gives you a list of any scheduled wake timer. So if you want to see when the device is going to wake up from wake timer, you can just type power config wake timers. Very useful information. There's a whole TechNet resource on power config. There's many more commands than what I'm referencing here. These are really common ones we use for troubleshooting when you configure power management. Insomnia. This right here is the main problem with power management being successful. You can use config manager, you can use GPO, you can use any utility you want to configure our system to go to sleep after an XXX minutes of an activity. But if the system doesn't go to sleep, what good is it, right? Insomnia is just what you think it is. It's when the system does not go to sleep. Computers should go to sleep, but something prevents it. Some common causes of insomnia are usually IT-related, applications that override suspend requests, security policies, streaming audio, AV scanners, some issues with BitLocker. Legacy drivers also cause machines not to go to sleep. So if you ever have an XP machine with a standard VGA driver, it will not go to sleep because the OS doesn't know if that driver supports it. I've seen also with customers dongles. So if you guys use hardware dongles to support different hardware, that would cause the machines not to go to sleep. You can use power config to determine what is causing the machine not to go to sleep. For example, this is an example right here where I have PowerPoint open, and when you launch PowerPoint in full screen mode, it submits a request to prevent the machine to go to sleep. I'll say with Windows 7, we actually see more issues with machines not going to sleep with Windows 7 than XP. And the reason why is because all network traffic, remote file networks, I should say. So if you have a remote file open on a share, it prevents the machine from going to sleep if you have any remote network shares open. Also, if you have an RDP session open, if you ever launch an RDP session on a machine, even if you're not still connected through RDP, until you reboot that system, Windows 7 prevents it from going to sleep with C. So it's really important if you're implementing power management to understand that there's a good chance that your machines may not go to sleep because of insomnia. And you can use power config on Windows 7 and higher to really troubleshoot it. You can also use your event logs, system event logs, and you can use community sites to help research this as well. Many community sites, my IT forum, you can post, for example, and there's many vendors and community members that will respond to you and help you solve some of those insomnia problems. But this is where, in the field, mostly all your problems are with regards to lack of savings or lack of actual savings with your environment. So just like there's narcolepsy, there's also a condition called insomnia. There's also a condition called narcolepsy. And that's exactly what you think it is. You put a machine to sleep. I'm sorry, you wake a machine up. Sorry, it's Wednesday of a conference in Vegas. I'm starting to get a little tired here. You wake a machine up, and exactly 2 minutes later, the machine goes right back to sleep. Microsoft thought it would be a good idea to implement this because they said, hey, if we're waking a system up and there's no user activity, it probably shouldn't be awake anyways, and it should be conserving power. So it's called a system unattended sleep timeout. And that's a problem because if you want to wake machines up for maintenance or software distribution, before the config manager agent starts doing its thing, which will keep it awake, it submits a request for override. it will just fall right back asleep. It's exactly 2 minutes later. So anyways, that setting can actually be, with Windows 7 and higher, you can fix it through Power Config. The problem is Microsoft decided to make it a hidden setting. So in order to enable the ability to configure it, you have to actually configure a registry key value to show it up in the power policy. And then you can go into the UI to actually configure it as well. Not only just Power Config, you can use the UI to use that. So if you see that, that's what's going on with narcolepsy. So we talked about using a maintenance task for waking systems up for maintenance. You can also use a schedule task to create a wake timer. That's that wake the computer to run this task checkbox. So if you wake a system up, it will wake it up. Again, if you have a laptop and you have it configured to enable with Windows 7, that's the way you have to configure it as well. So if you wanted to give your users, I know a lot of times a reason for exclusion is because, hey, we have a scheduled task that runs something at 2 o'clock in the morning for processing. Well, that's no longer an excuse because you can just tell them to check that off and it'll wake the system up if it's sleeping. You can use the set scheduled task in an automated fashion. So if you want to distribute a wake-up time outside of Config Manager, with XP, you can create a template scheduled task job. You can then copy it to like the C Windows tasks folder, and then you can execute a scheduled task command to take ownership of the local system to deploy it out. You can also, with Windows Vista and 7, there's an API for configuring task schedulers, and there's this actual option settings, wake to run equals enable wake to run. You can configure it, and in the resources that I have, there's a good community script that actually will enable a scheduled task wake on LAN to wake it up. So definitely check out that script. Other considerations are with 802.1x secured networks. If you're going to use vPro AMT, there is an additional post-processing script you need to configure in order to work with 802.1x networks. And with Magic Packet, your really only option is with Cisco. Cisco switches, there's a way to do .1x control direction, which basically says allow a Magic Packet to go to your guest network if it's coming specifically from the last known network the device had on the port or the VLAN. So look into that. There is also potential impact to end users. We kind of talked about that before, but keep an eye out for map drives not popping up when they log into a system, especially if the system is logged off when it goes to sleep. What we see sometimes is machines wake up so quickly that the network stack hasn't really finished initializing, and you log in and your login scripts don't run too quickly. So you just may need to use simple communication, wait 10 seconds, count to 20, then log in to solve that. Not so much with when you're already logged in, the machine goes to sleep. What you might see is a red X on a map network drive, and then you just double click on it and it reconnects. If you use Outlook, PST files that are non-cache mode on network shares, which is totally supported by Microsoft, that might be a challenge for your environment because the PST files will be obviously on a network share, and when the machine goes to sleep, they'll be disconnected. So keep that in mind. Cache mode is your friend with sleep. Remote desktop users, so with Windows 7, like I said, if an RDP session is enabled, the machine will not go to sleep. But with Windows XP, it doesn't. So if you're worried about that, keep that in mind that someone using a remote desktop, the machine might go to sleep, especially with its XP. The other thing to mention with remote desktops is if the monitor doesn't turn on sometimes, you won't be able to access an RDP session. So if you have issues where your machine's woken up and you go to RDP onto it, and it just basically seems like it's doing nothing, it's possibly because the monitor's time is not turned on, and that's really with XP, another issue with XP. And really, finally, I'll say that Microsoft does a great job. They deliver a product, just like everything else, to meet a basic need in the environment. And there's a lot you can do with Config Manager Power Management, as I tried to explain through this slide deck. But I just say research some of the other partners out there that enhance Config Manager Power Management that have been doing it for years. There's a couple of us at the Expo Hall. I'm not here as a Redeem representative, but I'd strongly suggest you come and talk to us if you're interested in just chatting about power management. There are solutions that solve some of these challenges with Config Manager Power Management, including wake on LAN constraints, 802.1x solutions. We talked about reporting, how basic it is kind of with Config Manager. There's much more detailed reporting in some of the partners and the ISVs. That even can go into details about utilization reporting and really detailed power management reporting. Per device, instead of being blended, you can have per device and location utility costs. And all these steps to configure and correct insomnia and narcolepsy, they provide pretty much automated solutions to doing that. So again, I recommend you do your research if you're really interested in that, and I highly recommend if anybody has any questions, they come and see me either on the expo hall. I'm at booth 636, or I'll stay after the session and talk to people for a little while. But I highly recommend you just do your research, and just do something. That's the real point of this presentation. Is there's no reason not to do anything with the tools out there, even if it's just putting machines to sleep on weekends. That's a significant step and change from many organizations from being 24/7 shops. So just do something. That's really what I want to get across in the session. So that's it. Here's some resources that I went through on the different slides for configuring the different options like USB BioX, the packet sniffer software, the script to enable wake up for scheduled tasks. Use it when the PowerPoints become available. Go to some of these resources and all the TechNet resources on Config Manager Power Management. And please submit your, like everybody says, submit your session evaluations, and hopefully you found this information relevant and useful. That's about it. So thank you very much for coming, and appreciate the time.